Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Today we're doing a linguistic investigation, and it's one that gets straight to the heart of divine sovereignty over creation. Instead of, a big, sweeping theological concept, we're really going to focus on a tiny grammatical structure, a single Hebrew root, more, which is the word for rain.
And when you first hear that, it just sounds like, vocabulary. But the source material we got for this deep dive is incredibly technical. It gets right into the roots, grammar, its cognates across other Semitic languages, and what it means theologically in the Old Testament. Our job today is to use this one root's function as a kind of grammatical key, a shortcut maybe, to really get how the biblical authors describe God's interaction with the world through something as simple as sending rain from the sky.
And this is really an exercise in trying to see the world through ancient eyes.
Yeah.
What we find in the way māṭār is used is this all-encompassing view of YHWH's complete control over creation. The grammar itself actually builds a reality that forces you, the listener, to look past the natural event and see the sovereign actor behind it. The function of this word root holds both blessing and judgment, and they're both administered by YHWH, who's in command of the elements.
It's a view that fits perfectly with our understanding of providence. Nothing happens by accident. All things are caused by God, either, directly or through secondary means.
Yeah.
And the way this Hebrew verb works seems to demand that kind of theological posture.
It really does.
All right, let's unpack this right away, starting with a really surprising linguistic fact that defines this whole root.
Okay.
The word māṭār comes from the noun māṭār, which just means rain. That makes the verb a denominative verb. It's a verb that comes from a noun. But when you look at how it's used in biblical Hebrew, something really big is missing. The simplest active form, the qualnam stem, is just not there.
And that absence, well, it's a huge deal, both for the grammar and for the theology. The qual, or cal stem, would be the basic active form. It's the one that would normally translate as the simple impersonal statement, it rained, or to rain.
But it's just not used.
It's not attested in biblical Hebrew for this root. It's just gone.
So if the language can't simply say, the sky opened and it rained, without assigning some kind of cause, where does that push the linguistic focus?
Well, the structure itself forces the action away from being an impersonal, meteorological event and towards something active and intentional. And the sources are very powerful to point out that this isn't just some Hebrew quirk. This preference for derived stems, you see it in related Semitic languages too, Chaldaic, Syriac, Arabic. It points to a much broader linguistic pattern where rain just isn't treated as an independent action.
So the linguistic environment itself sort of pushes back against the idea of an autonomous weather system. Since the basic qual stem isn't an option, the authors have to use these derived stems. What are the two main ones they turn to?
So we shift immediately to what are called the productive stems, the Hiphil and the Niphal. These are the two main ways to talk about the action or state of raining.
Okay.
The Hiphil or hif stem is causative. It means to make it rain or to cause rain to fall.
Then the other one.
The Niphal or nif stem is passive. It means to be rained upon or to be watered with rain.
If you just stop and think about that, what that means for our view of God's involvement in the world is just immense. The grammar itself stops you from reporting rain as a neutral thing.
Right.
It immediately moves the focus to one of two questions. Causation, who is causing this water to fall? Or reception, what is receiving this water?
That's it. This structure inherently frames the act of rain as something that starts outside of the physical phenomenon itself. Rain is never just happening. It is always caused by an agent, or it's received by a recipient.
So the grammar is the perfect linguistic container for the theological view that YHWH is the main active subject of this verb. It demonstrates that doctrine of concursus where God's action works with or through the creation he sustains.
And since we know the Old Testament authors are completely committed to monotheism and YHWH's sovereignty, the linguistic structure fits the theological message perfectly. It's almost as if the language itself grew in a way that would suppress any idea of chance.
That's one way to interpret the data, for sure. It conditions the hearer. When you're reading a text and the simple verb for a natural action just isn't there, you're automatically guided to look for the agent.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to see how ancient translators handled this causative structure when they were moving the text into Greek for the Septuagint, the LXX. Our sources say they had to pick terms that really captured that intentional caused action.
They did. For the verb ner, the LXX uses a few different Greek terms. The most common one is bresh, which shows up 5 times. They also use epibresha once, and kind of surprisingly, niptu once.
So what does bresh get across that makes it a good choice for that causative Hiphil?
Well, breshers just means to moisten or to rain. But when you use it in the active voice, it often carries this sense of to pour forth or to cause to rain. So it keeps that active role that's implied by the Hebrew Hiphil.
Okay.
And epibresha just adds the preposition epi, which means upon. So it means to rain upon, which is a perfect mirror for that common Hebrew structure himer, al cause to rain upon.
So those are pretty straightforward ways of keeping that sense of a directed external action.
They are.
But that last one you mentioned, niptu, that seems really different. Doesn't that usually mean to wash or to cleanse?
It does, and that is a very specific translation choice. Niptu means to wash, usually a part of the body, like your hands or your feet. This usage might suggest a context where the rain is being seen as a cleansing action, maybe ritually or metaphorically, not just as a weather event.
I see.
The sources don't really give the specific context for that single use, but it shows the translators were grappling with the theological and the physical meanings of the root. They sometimes opted for the effect, the washing or cleansing, rather than the direct cause of the raining.
So even in translation, you see the ripple effect of the grammar. The translators couldn't just pick a neutral word for precipitation. They had to choose words that implied active control or a specific result.
And that really sets the stage for looking at the Hiphil, where YHWH is always the active subject.
Okay, let's turn our attention then completely to the hydrophil stem, the causative one. This is where the sheer scope of YHWH's operation in the physical world is really laid out for us. The Hiphil is the standard active verb for mith, and it always communicates causation, to cause rain to fall, to send rain. And the sources confirm again and again that the main subject, the agent, is YHWH.
And the utility of the Hiphil is pretty extraordinary. It manages to capture YHWH's control over basic creation, miraculous provision, and punitive judgment, all inside one grammatical framework.
All with one stem.
All with one stem. We can basically break down the Hiphil's meaning into 3 distinct, theologically heavy categories, all unified by this underlying idea of causing something to fall from the sky.
Let's start with the first one, most basic function. YHWH, causing water liquid or solid to fall from the heavens. This is the direct application of the verb to the weather.
This is the core meaning, to cause it to rain, or to send rain down. A key point here is that the sources identify a common, very precise Hebrew construction used for this. Himher au.
And that literally means...
Literally, he caused rain to fall upon, which really underscores the deliberate nature of the action and the precise targeting of whatever is receiving it.
We see this right at the beginning of Scripture, don't we? It connects it immediately to God's creative and sustaining work. Like in Genesis 2.5, describing the world before man, YHWH had not yet caused it to rain upon the ground.
Exactly. The state of the pre-Eden earth is defined by the absence of this caused action. And then not long after, during the flood, YHWH asserts his control again, saying, "He will make and cause it to rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights."
So the verb is used to mark the beginning of creation and then the recreation through judgment. It's an assertion of exclusive domain.
Absolutely. Just think about that challenge in Job 38, where YHWH interrogates Job from the whirlwind, asking, "Who causes it to rain on a land where no one lives, on the wilderness without a man?" This is a claim of competence that belongs only to the Creator. No human agency, no idol can do this. The grammatical agent of the Hiphil for rain is, in theological reality, unique.
I find the negative usage you see in Isaiah 5.6 to be just as telling. God is threatening the unfaithful vineyard, and he says he will command the clouds mehavanther mat to keep rain from falling upon it.
Yes.
So the causative power is shown by the withholding of that necessary life source.
That's a critical theological point we have to sit with. Even the denial or the stopping of rain is not passive neglect. It is an active, deliberate choice by the divine subject, using the exact same causative Hiphil stem. It shows that both providing and restricting life are completely within YHWH's control.
And while YHWH is the ultimate author, the sources do mention that sometimes the immediate subject of the Hiphil can be the clouds, the insum.
Yes, but this doesn't reduce YHWH's sovereignty at all. As it's implied in that Isaiah passage, when the clouds are the grammatical subject, They're just acting as secondary instruments. They're operating under a strict, predetermined divine command.
So the rain is still a caused action.
The rain is still a caused action, but the mechanism of the causation might be spelled out. This mirrors the Reformed understanding of secondary causes. The clouds act, but only because God commands them to act.
So even when we're just talking about meteorology, we are forced to talk about metaphysics.
That's exactly what the grammar makes you do.
Okay, now let's move to how this causative Hiphil expands beyond just liquid water. The stem is broadened to mean provide, or more formally, rain down, based on that deep theological idea that rain itself is the primary necessary provision for life.
This usage connects YHWH's control over the atmosphere directly to his control over sustenance. It makes the Hiphil of Mao into the grammatical tool used to describe miraculous heavenly supply. It links the ordinary miracle of rain to the extraordinary miracle of manna.
And the Exodus story gives us the most spectacular example of this, the manna. The Israelites needed food, and the same verb that sends water is used to send bread.
Indeed. The Hiphil and Phil stem describes raining down food, specifically manna or man or heavenly bread, layam. Exodus 16.4 is the key verse. Behold, I will cause to rain bread from heaven for you.
The fact that the same verb is used for atmospheric water and for miraculous food, it argues really strongly that the author saw both events as coming from the same divine tap.
It speaks to the efficiency of God's control, doesn't it? He doesn't need a different verb root to send something other than water. The act of causing to fall from heaven is linguistically consistent no matter what the material is.
Right, and that consistency is very telling.
Psalm 78.24 also says, God Amir caused to rain down manna for them to eat. And then in verse 27, it escalates to meat. God Amir caused to rain down meat, or sure, it says flesh as the dust and feathered fowls as the sand of the seas.
That image of flesh falling like dust or sand, it's meant to convey the sheer, almost overwhelming abundance of the supply, mirroring the abundance of a life-giving rainstorm.
And grammatically, there's a small detail worth noting. Our sources point out that the Exodus 16.4 example about manna is used without the typical preposition al, meaning upon, which you normally need to specify the recipient.
Why would that be?
Well, the omission might stress the direct provision to Israel. Perhaps it's emphasizing the miracle itself rather than the land receiving it, though that's, open to interpretation. In either case, the Hiphil asserts YHWH's absolute authority over provision. He manages the weather, and by extension, he manages existence.
He sustains life both chemically with rain and calorically with bread and meat, all using the exact same grammatical tool.
Now we have to look at the dark side of this grammatical coin. The third category for the Hiphil's usage, it keeps the idea of causing an object or substance to fall from the sky in great abundance, but now the purpose is punishment. The action is still to cause to fall.
The most dramatic, terrifying historical event that uses this stem has to be the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
No question. Genesis 19.24 records YHWH Rayamir caused to rain down fire and sulfur or brimstone goritwash upon the wicked cities.
The verb choice is so deliberate.
It is. By using my in the Hiphil for fire and brimstone, the text directly links the spectacular supernatural act of judgment to the very same sovereign mechanism YHWH uses to deliver life-giving, ordinary rain.
This means the difference between a blessing and a curse is not the agent or the action causing the fall, but the substance and the recipient.
Precisely. And we see this consistent application across other judgments. For example, during the plagues on Egypt, the destructive force of hail, bara, is described using this Hiphil stem in Exodus 9. God Mamre causes to rain hails, a natural thing weaponized for a divine purpose.
And this application extends into figurative judgment against the wicked, too. Psalm 11.6 says YHWH Yammer causes to rain down snares, palm, fire, and brimstone on the wicked. The snares are metaphorical, but the verb used to deliver them is concrete.
This combination of concrete action and abstract consequence is compelling. Ezekiel 38.22, in a prophecy against Gog, lists a whole catalog of judgments using this mechanism. It says God executes judgment with pestilence and blood, sweeping rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone.
And notice the order there.
Right. Natural actions, sweeping rain, hailstones, are blended seamlessly with supernatural destructive actions, fire and brimstone, all under the umbrella of the Hiphil of Mit.
This shows the incredible functional efficiency of this verb root. The Hiphil's construction usually takes the direct object hail, fire, manna, and then it's followed by the preposition al or upon, the recipient, whether that's the land, the faithful, or the wicked.
And this is the essential synthesis of the Hiphil. The single causative stem covers meteorological provision, miraculous sustenance, and sweeping destruction. The theological conclusion is that YHWH's cosmic action is unitary and fully sovereign.
So the effect, whether it's life, nourishment, or utter annihilation, depends entirely on the covenant context and the nature of the one receiving it.
Yes. The grammar refuses to acknowledge any middle ground where rain or providence just happens by chance.
It just reinforces that core concept. The agent is always in control, whether he's delivering the soft, life-giving rain of spring or the hard, destructive brimstone of judgment. That detailed look at the Hiphil really establishes YHWH as the exclusive and necessary agent behind the action. But if the Hiphil describes YHWH causing the action, we now need to look at the flip side. Which stem describes the land, or the vineyard, or the recipient receiving it?
That brings us to the Nephal stem. While the Hiphil is the active causative verb, the Nephal is its reflexive or passive counterpart. It means to be rained upon, or to be watered with rain.
So this describes the state or the location receiving the rain, shifting the focus from the actor to the object.
Right. And the power of this contrast is seen most clearly when the two stems work together. Our sources point to Amos 4.7 as a perfect example of this dynamic, all in a single verse.
Can you walk us through that verse?
So Amos 4.7 describes YHWH imposing this calculated judgment, showing absolute precision over the landscape. He says, I withheld the rain from you, so I would cause it to rain on one city and not cause it to rain on another city. But then the verse continues, one piece shall be rained upon. And that uses the imperfect Niphal form, Timea, and the piece whereon it shall not cause rain to fall shall wither.
The contrast there is spectacular because the land is being manipulated with surgical precision.
Absolutely. The first piece of land is described passively, Timea shall be rained upon. The second piece of land is defined by the absence of the causative Hiphil action, where God does not cause rain to fall. The Nephal passive focuses only on the reception of the benefit, while the Hiphil causative right next to it focuses on the agent's decision to act or not to act.
The grammar shows YHWH dividing the land with a meteorological scalpel.
It does. It also gives us a clear picture of theological reality. Since the land cannot make itself rain, the only way it gets wet is by being rained upon, which makes the Niphil the only possible verb form from the perspective of the land itself.
And for completeness, our sources also mention that other rarer passive stems exist, or at least they're noted in textual conjectures, which also mean rained upon.
Right. The Hiphil and Pula stems are both passive or intensive passive forms. While Nephal is the standard, these other forms would offer alternative ways to emphasize that passive state, maybe describing the land as having been thoroughly rained upon.
So where do we see those suggested?
For instance, in Ezekiel 22.24, which describes the land of Israel as one that is not cleansed nor rained upon in the day of indignation, the Hebrew text sometimes suggests a reading that could be replaced by the passive hafal participle or the pool participle.
And even though these are rare or, theoretical, they reinforce the idea that the grammatical system had dedicated ways to talk about the consequence of the Hiphil action, the passive reception.
Precisely. The system is structurally complete. If someone causes the rain, which is the Hiphil, something has to receive the rain, which is the Nephal or Hofal or pool.
Let's widen the scope now, moving from the internal workings of biblical Hebrew to its linguistic relatives. Does this unique behavior of ma, specifically the missing qual and the preference for the causative stem, does that carry through the rest of the Semitic family?
It does, which really strengthens the argument that this pattern is ancient and deep-seated. The root ma has strong cognates across many Semitic languages and dialects.
Let's start with the earliest evidence we have.
We can start with Ugaritic, which predates Hebrew quite dramatically. The root is attested there as ma. This shows how old the root itself is, appearing in texts from ancient Ugarit. Now, while we can't definitively confirm the exact grammatical constraints on the qual in Ugaritic, the root's presence in a context focused on weather and fertility is very significant.
And what about the more widely spread languages?
In Arabic, the verbal form is mahara. And critically, the sources confirm the root's behavior in Chaldaic, noting that shared tendency across Semitic languages to avoid or rarely use the basic simple stem for this particular natural action. It reinforces the idea that raining is generally seen as an action that needs an external subject.
Okay, let's talk about the Aramaic branch, since it so often runs parallel to Hebrew.
In Syriac, which is a dialect of Aramaic, the verb is maha. It's used across various stems. The peel, which is the simple or qual equivalent, the palel, and the afel, which is the causative Hiphil equivalent.
So the simple form exists there.
It might exist, but the causative afel is highly active. And critically, in Jewish Aramaic and Targumic dialects, they frequently use the afel stem, specifically the form in array.
And the use of afil in Aramaic is key, because it does the exact same job as the Hiphil in Hebrew. It means to cause to rain.
That's right. The widespread and active preference for these causative stems, the Hiphil and the afel across Hebrew, Middle Hebrew, Jewish Aramaic, and Syriac, shows this linguistic continuity. It shows that generations of speakers and authors across the Near East instinctively framed the act of precipitation as a caused action, one that required an initiator.
So the grammar denies the very possibility of meteorological indifference. If you want to talk about rain in these ancient languages, you have to specify who is responsible for the water falling or who is on the receiving end.
And that shared linguistic reality deeply shapes the way the theological messages of the Old Testament are communicated.
Before we move on, I want to go back to a question I had. If near skips a qual, are there other major Hebrew verbs for natural events that also show this kind of tendency?
That is a great question. While ma is maybe the most famous and clearly defined example of a verb skipping the qual for these kinds of reasons, it isn't totally unique. Verbs related to specific atmospheric actions, like bread for hail, which only appears in the Hiphil and Nifal, or certain expressions involving sound or fire, can sometimes show these constraints, favoring the causative or passive stems.
Okay.
But the comprehensive control shown by Mao over provision, blessing, and judgment makes it a real standout case in Hebrew grammar for theological application. It truly functions as the central heavenly faucet verb.
We've established the verb root's function as the instrument of divine control. Now let's turn to the subject that is being controlled, the noun form, māṭār, which simply means rain.
Māṭār refers generally to the substance or the process of water falling in drops from the sky. It's useful to distinguish it from its conceptual sibling, gashim, which means a shower or a heavy rain.
So māṭār is the general term.
Right. While they're often used synonymously or in parallel, māṭār tends to describe the general precipitation needed for life, while ga might imply more intensity or a sudden downpour.
When the LXX translators were dealing with the noun māṭār, our sources say that they overwhelmingly used huetos, the standard Greek word for rain, which appears 36 times. That seems pretty consistent.
It is.
But there was one curious translation choice mentioned.
Yes. While huetos is standard, there's a single instance where the noun māṭār is translated using the Greek verb horash, which means to see.
Which is highly unusual. The noun is being rendered as a completely unrelated verb. What could possibly account for that linguistic jump? Was it just a scribal error, or is there a reason they connected rain to sight?
Since the textual sources don't give a definite answer, we are left to speculate. It could have been an error or a phonetic misunderstanding, but if we assume it was intentional, it might relate to the theological context.
How so?
Rain in the arid Near East isn't just common background noise, it's an event. It's a sign that is actively seen and recognized as an act of God, especially when it happens in unusual seasons. The rain itself is a visible sign of YHWH's covenant faithfulness or his judgment.
So the translation might be emphasizing the visible, observable nature of the divine provision.
It's possible, but regardless of that specific translation quirk, the noun māṭār carries profound theological weight, especially when you're talking about the relationship between YHWH and the land of Canaan.
It is absolutely central. Rain is inherently seen as a blessing sent and withheld by YHWH. Unlike Egypt, which relied on the predictable flooding of the Nile, Canaan was completely dependent on seasonal rainfall. Therefore, rain māṭār became the primary barometer of covenant fidelity. We see this most clearly laid out in Deuteronomy, the covenant document itself.
Exactly. Deuteronomy 28 ties obedience directly to the availability of the rain of thy land, Merarai. Verse 12 promises that YHWH will open his good treasure, the heavens, to give the mire to the land in its season. But then verse 24 threatens the curse. YHWH will turn the rain of the land into powder and dust.
This makes rain a fundamental part of the covenant structure. It's not just meteorology, it's morality reflected in the weather.
In this context, mire is not just water, it's divine approval. It's a visible sign of the Lord's favor that's necessary to water the land. and the absence of rain immediately signals judgment.
Which is why the concept of rain is used so extensively in figurative ways throughout Scripture.
Yes, it is.
So how does the concept of rain get lifted out of the weather report and applied metaphorically?
Well, first, it's used as a powerful simile for refreshment and revival. Just as rain revives the dry earth, spiritual instruction or blessing can be described as falling like mire.
And second, tying back to the causative verb, it's used as a sign sent by extraordinary supernatural means.
The example in 1 Samuel 12.17 is a prime case. The prophet Samuel demonstrates YHWH's authority and judgment during the harvest season, which is traditionally the dry season in Israel. Samuel calls upon YHWH to send māṭār, rain, at a time when rain is unseasonable.
Which is an action that's both supernatural and punitive, confirming Samuel's words and showing the people's sin in demanding a king.
Exactly. And that concept of the unseasonable rain mare bakar, or rain in the harvest, is a special category, isn't it?
It is. It's the right substance, life-giving water, but delivered at the wrong time, disrupting the harvest cycle. This disruption indicates judgment or a divine intrusion that overrides the natural order. He shows that YHWH's control is not just over the quantity of rain, but the timing, the location, and the seasonal appropriateness.
And finally, the noun is used, just like the verb, to describe destructive power. The force and overwhelming abundance of a downpour can be compared to destruction or judgment.
Whether it's literal as a blessing or figurative as a sign of judgment, the noun māṭār is tightly bound to YHWH's sovereign control. It reinforces the picture that the verb established. The root māṭār functions as a heavenly tap, operated by the Creator, delivering exactly what is necessary: life, sustenance, or precise judgment, calibrated perfectly to the covenant context.
It seems impossible to separate the grammar from the theology in this case. The linguistic structure itself preaches the doctrine of God's constant active providence. The Hebrew text leaves the reader with no escape from recognizing the actor.
This deep dive into the root māṭār has given us a surprisingly detailed window into the divine economy of providence. We established the two main grammatical modes: the Hiphil causative, detailing YHWH's active role in sending literal rain, manna, fire, and brimstone. And the Niphil passive, describing the reception, the object, or the land being rained upon, as we saw with that surgical precision in Amos 4.7.
What becomes clear through synthesizing all this lexical analysis is the unified nature of divine action. Every drop of water, every miracle of provision, and every act of judgment is contained within the causative grammar of this single word, root.
Right.
The grammar dictates that YHWH must be acknowledged as the sole sufficient cause for all precipitation and precipitation-like events. It allows for no space for random chance.
It forces the theological issue before the meteorological one can even be raised.
It absolutely does. The language is structured to reflect reality as the Old Testament authors understood it, a world under constant, detailed divine supervision. And this leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. If the simplest way to talk about rain, the simple active qual, is unavailable to the authors of Scripture, and they are left only with the options of causing rain or being rained upon, how does that grammatical reality contrast with our modern secularized view of weather, where we instinctively speak of impersonal pressure systems and cold fronts? Does the Hebrew text condition us, even when we read about a simple rain shower, to automatically look for the sovereign actor who is commanding the clouds and opening the heavens?